Comic lovers, welcome back to Comics Are Dope, the podcast. I'm your host, BJ Kicks, and on this show, I like to have conversations about the greatest hobby and medium in the world with the people that help bring it to life. So today I get to present to you an awesome conversation I had with writer and artist Roger Langridge. Now, as this goes live, we are gearing up for the release of Justice Ducks, issue number 1, coming out from Dynamite Entertainment. This is replacing Darkwing Duck as the flagship Darkwing Duck title over at Dynamite. And so Roger Langridge is writing that book, and it is awesome. And so I got to have a conversation with him, not just about Darkwing Duck or Justice Ducks, but I got to have a conversation with him about his inspirations, what he brings to each project, what his goals are as a creator overall, and of course, what work he's most proud of. So I will take a back seat and let you guys listen to this awesome conversation with Roger Langridge. Well, guys, you've seen the title and thumbnail, but today's episode is really, really special to me. And in order for me to illustrate how special it is, I'll have to tell you a bit of a story. So when I was, 4 or 5 years old, I used to go to daycare. So it would have been 3 or 4. So I'd go to daycare. We'd watch all sorts of TV shows because we watched a lot of TV when I was in daycare. And my favorite, besides Batman the Animated Series, was this one show with a super, super catchy theme song called Darkwing Duck. And so we would go to the store and stuff, right? And I begged my mother to get me this VHS. The VHS was a 2-part episode that they had combined into a movie and called it Just Us, Justice Ducks. And so my mother bought me that Darkwing Duck VHS, and I watched it so many times. And now, some 30 years later, we're getting a Justice Ducks comic book from Dynamite Entertainment. And here to talk to me about it is series writer Roger Langridge. How you doing today, Roger?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm excited, as you can tell.
Great.
I even had to wear my Darkwing shirt for the occasion. So, I mean, obviously we're here because Dynamite's brought out a new Darkwing series. We had a 10-issue Darkwing series that just wrapped up and really dovetails nicely into a new Justice Ducks series. And so we're going to talk about, how that came about, how you got the call. But first, for anyone who may not be as familiar with you or your work, do you mind introducing yourself and kind of your journey into comics for the audience?
Sure. I'm from New Zealand originally. I grew up in New Zealand. And I decided when I was very young that I wanted to be a cartoonist when I grew up. But New Zealand doesn't have a comic industry. So the plan from quite an early age was to go to a country that did have a comic industry and try and break in there. So that's why when I was in my early 20s, I moved to London and I started doing work for things like the Judge Dredd magazine and Deadline magazine. And there were quite a lot of outlets at that time that were going. And I did work for Fantagraphics as well at that time. My brother and I used to do mini comics together, and we submitted some of those mini comics to Fantagraphics while I was still living in New Zealand, and they said they'd like to do a one-shot with us, and that turned into an ongoing relationship with them. So I was sort of working on both sides of the Atlantic for a long time. I've always worked on my own stuff as well as sort of licensed things, more on my own stuff, to be honest. So I self-published a comic in the early 2000s called Fred the Clown, which led to work for Nickelodeon magazine, which in turn led to work for Disney Adventures magazine. Wow. And that led to the Muppet Show comic book. And that's probably what I'm best known for. That's that and Thor the Mighty Avenger, which has a connection to Justice Ducks because I have the same editor, Nate Cosby.
Wow. Just another reminder to always put your best foot forward, right? So now you are a comic artist, of course, because your goal was to be a cartoonist, but you're a writer as well. What got you into writing comics?
Well, I used to do comics with my brother. Like I said, we used to do mini comics together. And when I moved to London, it was a lot more difficult in those pre-internet days, because we're talking early 90s there, for us to correspond and keep that relationship going. We tried for a while, but it just became more and more difficult. And I ended up just writing things so that I would have something to draw. And that kind of led to me getting an appetite for it, I suppose. When I started self-publishing, I was writing my own stuff then. And that in turn led to people seeing the work that I've written and asking me to write things. So I didn't intend to set out to become a comic book writer. It's something that's just sort of evolved from necessity, really.
Right. Okay. So your goal ultimately was to become a cartoonist, but who were the cartoonists that you were inspired by?
Well, the really big one, and it's relevant to Justice Ducks, is Carl Barks, the creator of Uncle Scrooge. Before I could read, I was quote unquote reading his comics. Right. He was a huge formative influence on just the way I write, the way I think about comics. Really, his sense of pacing, his sense of language and character. It's all there. If you look at my work, Carl Barks isn't very far away. So he was huge. I really love the old newspaper strips, things like Popeye and Crazy Cat. So I've got that's a big part of what's influenced me as well. I like as far as superhero things go, I tend to be more attracted to this kind of goofier stuff, the 60s DC stuff, or some of the early Marvel stuff. I really love the Marvel Monster books before the superheroes came along. That was a thing for me. So that's all part of the mix as well.
Nice. So I want to pause for a second at Carl Barks, right? I think, I'm born in 91, so Carl Barks is a bit before my time. For those of us in the audience who may not have witnessed it, right? Because Carl Barks, his Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck comics are like the most widely circulated comics in history. What was it about those books that made them so special?
Well, he's got just a really great sense of story. People talk about his Uncle Scrooge comics, which are sort of like these epic adventures, and that's sort of like the sort of the English language equivalent of things like Tintin, for example. These sort of beautifully crafted, really tightly plotted, very, very funny, perfect, complete stories. But his short stories are brilliant as well. The Donald Duck stories that he did in Walt Disney's Comics and Stories are sort of, I really like comedy, and the craft of writing a really good sitcom is, I think, something that's quite underrated because it's really, really difficult to do well. And he just did that continuously for 30 years. These 10-page stories were like these perfect little sitcoms, beautifully plotted with, things set up early on that paid off later on, and very funny, and just ticked along like a metronome. That's this perfect comic rhythm to them.
Right.
So just studying those, you could learn so much from that, or I could.
So what would you say? Obviously you're a comic writer, and I guess writing for television is a bit different, but what is it that's so difficult to nail about the sitcom and sort of episodic storytelling?
Well, in the case of sitcom, I think it's quite difficult because, and this is also appropriate to comics as well, to a large extent, things can't change because the status quo has to sort of be reset at the end of every story. But it's also, you have to have the illusion of change and the illusion of progress and the illusion of people going on some sort of journey, even if they end up where they started.
Right.
So that's quite difficult to do and still be a satisfying thing to experience, to read or to watch. Also, it's, making things funny is challenging, and making them continually funny and consistently funny even more so. And that, there's a lot of moving parts to that. The characters have to be right. The setting has to give an opportunity for things to happen that they can bounce off that will sort of make that work. There's a lot going on. It's deceptively complex, I think.
Right. So, and I love I've been diving into Hotel Fred, just
Oh,
in
thanks.
preparation for our conversation, and it's this for those who aren't familiar. It's a self-published strip that you do, and you post it daily on Instagram or on your blog, and each episode, if you will, or each issue is just four panels. It's a four-panel story arranged into like a square grid, and it's just kind of like everyday situations that are just funny. The cartoon style is fun, but just to be able to get like a really short laugh for the day is really awesome. What inspired you to do that, and how do you keep it going?
Um, well, it started because I was having a dry patch and I wasn't getting enough work, and I wanted to earn some money. So I started a Patreon,
Mm,
hoping that I could, have, even if it wasn't much money, a little bit of regular money coming in that I could
right.
count on every month. And the idea was to have something every day that was unique for the Patreons, for
Mm,
the Patreon. Um, so I ended up doing a daily strip, mainly because I thought um, drawing on my own life would be a replenishing source of material. I wouldn't
mm,
have to, plot out a big long story in advance or anything like that. It would be relatively easy to do. So I set up um, this grid so that I wouldn't have to make that decision about how to lay it out or anything. Just
mm.
slap the drawings down every day and put it out there every day. And then work started coming in, so I had to find a way to keep doing that as well as do my professional jobs.
Right.
And I ended up just getting up really early in the morning, getting up at like
Mm.
5 o'clock in the morning and doing that before I started work for the day. And I've been doing that for about 4 years now.
Wow.
I'm actually taking a break for a month or so now because I've got some writing that I need to do.
Mm.
But I'm going to be picking it up at the beginning of next month. So yeah.
Awesome. So besides the challenge of just getting up every day, um, you talk about just the inspiration sort of coming from everyday life. How easy is it for you to sort of find the humor in everyday life? And do you find that sort of looking for it for the strip, does it sort of help you just in regards to just kind of dealing with everyday life?
I think probably yes. I mean, uh, my relationship with my family tends to involve a lot of jokes anyway. It's
Mm,
it's just how we like to communicate, and my kids are very sharp, um, and they've got keen senses of humor, both of them.
mm,
So it comes quite naturally. It's and sometimes I exaggerate things for comic effect, but I don't have to. Sometimes
right.
it's already just a funny situation that I want to get down on paper.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Very cool. And so you like you said, you're probably best known for the Muppet Show. I guess it might be like the highest profile or the thing you did
Yeah, I think
consistently the longest, right? So how did that come about? And I guess what was your approach to it?
Um, well, first of all, how it came about. I was doing some freelance work for Disney Adventures magazine in sort of the 2010s, I guess, or early, no, 2000s, late 2000s,
Mm,
illustration work mainly. And somebody there uh, they had this strip running of Mickey Mouse that was drawn in a kind of off-model style, sort of an underground comics kind of sketchy style
mm,
by Glenn Boy, I think it was. And they wanted to do something else with some other Disney properties. Um, and one of the editors there was familiar with My Fred the Clown comics, which is set in a kind of vaudeville world.
mm,
So they thought I'd be a good fit for a Muppet Show thing done with that kind of approach, this kind of
right.
off-model um, gag strip approach.
Mm,
So I did some pages for Disney Adventures, and one page was published, and then the magazine was cancelled. So, so I guess these pages were circulating with Disney or whatever,
mm,
because what happened after that? A couple of years went by, and then Boom Studios picked up the rights to do the Muppets, and I guess they'd seen those pages because then they approached me to ask me if I would be interested in doing that as a regular thing. And I said yes, and we were off. We're off to the races.
awesome. So for those who haven't read The Muppet Show, is there a sort of ongoing premise is there like an ongoing plot thread, or is it just kind of really episodic book?
My approach to that was to have, like the Muppet Show on television, with the main difference being we couldn't use guest stars because that would involve sort of layers and layers of approval. But I tried to do it like an episode of the Muppet Show. So knowing that each set of 4 issues would be collected into a book, I tried to have some sort of unifying theme for those 4 issues. But I would try to have each issue relatively self-contained, even if there was a sort of a plot thread bubbling under. And within those issues, I would do sketches like the Muppet Show. So it sort of gave me the opportunity to do anything I wanted, really. If I had an idea to do something with the comic page, that, there was one where I had a character running through a building, and the comic page was the building, and time was represented by the character moving through this sort of cross section of the building. And you can do that on a comics page. And it seemed to me that was the best way to approach the Muppet Show comic, was to do things that you couldn't see on screen, to do things that were kind of that went along with the Muppet sense of humor, but which were unique to the comics medium, and to try and sort of push that side of it as much as I could. Because otherwise, why aren't you just watching television?
That's true. And the art in the Muppet Show comic is just, I love it. I was going through it earlier today. How do you balance the ideas you have in your head versus what you can commit to a page, right? Is there a time where, as a writer, your imagination's running wild, but then it's like, you know what, whether it's a deadline or some physical limitation or skill limitation, you're like, let's kind of abandon that or reshape that. How does that work for you as writer and artist?
Well, I think every person who writes and draws their own stuff has kind of a Jekyll-Hyde relationship with themselves, because you're always cursing the writer. As the artist, you're cursing the writer for writing something that's going to be quite difficult to draw. But as the art of cartooning is to simplify things and to streamline things and to clarify things. So you distill it to its essence, really, as that's the art of cartooning. That's what it's all about. So if you give yourself something as a writer that's really complicated to draw, you find ways of making it work. Sometimes it does mean drawing, hundreds of little faces. But if you can get away with not doing that, great. If you can think of an elegant way not to do that, that's the art of the craft of cartooning, I suppose. Yeah. It's a juggling.
Right. And I guess it makes sense so much that your original inspiration were like newspaper strips, or like these. You're often inspired by these sort of single creator stories or mediums. I think that's cool to be able to have a whole idea and execute it, right, from script to page to letters. Like that's admirable, or it's enviable, I should say, because I can't do anything like that. But hey, I can interview people, so that works.
Yeah. It's a valuable service.
Right. So you're probably best known for the Muppet Show, and over the years you've done a lot of sort of all ages projects, but you've done more quote unquote mature projects as well. I particularly enjoy seeing something like the Muppet Show, like Justice Ducks, on shelves, because what got me into comics was actually just shopping around for art for my daughter. We went to like a big free comic book day event, and they had, artists there, face painters, cosplayers, and all this stuff. And so it's an experience that, I was sharing with my then 9-year-old. Now she's, gosh, I'm old, but but it's always a treat, because for as much as I guess the greater society sort of looks at comics as a kid's medium, most of the books on shelves are not really kid friendly, right? And which is ironic, but what is it about the medium, or how is it that you are able to, I guess, balance that out, right? You make books and things that are safe for sort of anyone to read, or maybe just universally loved, but you can kind of tap into a mature bag when you need to. What do you think the key is to doing that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've worked on things like The Goon or The Rocketeer, but and I guess, something like The Goon is probably the nearest I've got to an actual mature comic, because it's there's a bit of swearing and whatnot, some sort of sexual references.
Right.
But even that is pretty squeaky clean, I guess. I mean, I don't do a lot of horror or gore or that's not something I'm interested in as a reader. So I tend not to write that stuff, But I mean, as far as writing for a general audience goes, it's kind of, I think, short-sighted to not do that, because you're limiting your audience, and comics aren't so rudely healthy that you can afford to do that. I think you do need to have. I mean, quite apart from having entry-level comics for new readers who might not be old enough for for some of the more mature titles, just cutting off your main titles from younger readers seems short-sighted. I mean, they've got money too, and they're happy to spend it.
Right. No, I totally agree. Yeah. As a parent, it shocks me how much I can't give to my kids, especially in a store where everything's all bright and colorful, right?
So. I think there are ways of writing things that adults will appreciate. And still make them accessible to kids. And, maybe they're not going to get all of it. Some of it will go over their heads, but if you allude to things rather than spelling them out, that's actually more challenging for an adult reader as well.
Right.
So, everybody wins.
Nice. And for years, you've been kind of doing that with the sort of major licensed properties. And so we've got the Muppet Show, and now you're moving into Justice Ducks. So you mentioned that, Nate was your editor on the Thor series before.
Yeah.
And so I imagine, it was pretty simple for him to say, you know what, let's put Roger on this. But to your knowledge, how did that come about?
Well, we've been talking about doing a couple of other things together. One with Nate as a writer and me drawing, and another one that I would be writing and drawing and he would be editing. And for whatever reason, both of those projects have been taking a long time to get going. With approvals and whatnot. So I was having put quite a few months into working on these other things. I needed to get some paying work. So I mentioned this to Nate, and he had this Justice Ducks project ready to go, basically. It had already been approved. And he knew that I liked Carl Barks, and he knew that I liked old 60s Marvels and, Silver Age comics. And he thought I'd be a really good fit for that. So I said yes. And off we went. And, I had to write, an outline and get that approved. And then I had to write another outline and get that approved. Being Disney, these things take a while, but we got there in the end. And off we went.
Nice. So Justice Ducks is going to be a 5-issue miniseries.
Yeah.
And you're writing, but Carlo Sidloro is on art. Carlo, who was the series artist for Darkwing Duck. So for the last year. So for you guys who are reading Darkwing or excited for this, know that the art is in great hands. It's really good. It's so fun. It looks just like the show, but better because technology's better, right? So it's awesome. So I know we can't spoil anything ahead of the issue coming out next week, but is there a general, or what can you tell us about the story for Justice Ducks?
Okay, well, there's each issue is more or less self-contained, but there's an ongoing subplot that gets involved in the final issue. So they all involve aliens, and there's a reason they all involve aliens, and that's kind of how we resolve that. What gets resolved at the end, but it's an excuse for me to do things like old Marvel monsters like Fin Fang Foom, that kind of thing. We've got some sort of there's like something that's slightly reminiscent of Doctor Who that you might recognize. There's various sort of tropes of aliens from popular fiction pop up throughout the series, and the characters are all there, all present and correct. The supporting cast is there. We've got Goslin and Launchpad, and I think Honker pops up in one issue. So everybody from the show that you recognize will be there. We've got Darkwing moaning about it all because he's not a joiner. He's
Right.
a solo artist.
Right.
And he likes to do things his own way. So, being he's sort of the reluctant member of the team, I guess. And he's sort of like the grit in the oyster.
Right. No, for sure. And that was one of the fun things about this Darkwing comic that just ended, right? Is watching him sort of fight all the way having a team. Like, he does not want to have a team until he absolutely needs one, right? And that's even central to the Just Us Justice Ducks episode, right? Like, Darkwing wants to be the cool guy with the gas gun.
Yeah, yeah.
I just wanted an excuse to put this on camera.
Excellent.
But he doesn't work well with others, but he has to work well with others. I'll ask this, right? How much research goes into writing a title like this? Like, do you have to spend hours watching the TV show? Did you already have like familiarity with it?
I wasn't that familiar with it at all. I sort of knew the character vaguely, but I did have to do quite a bit of research. So, I watched old episodes and read some of the old comics. And there's a Darkwing wiki that I consulted quite heavily, just to make sure I got the facts straight. Right. And of course, there were people from Disney checking all my scripts. So if I strayed too far from what the characters were supposed to be, they sort of put me back on track. So if you're invested in the characters, you should be happy.
Awesome. Now, I talked about this with Sweeney Boo a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about Cruella de Vil and just surprising things that she wasn't able to do with Cruella in the comics. Was there anything surprising to you that you weren't able to include in Justice Ducks?
Yes. There were a few things. They've got a very, what seems to be arbitrary rule about referring to monkeys. Apparently you can't do that. There was things about using the word crazy, even if it wasn't relating to somebody's mental health. If it was just like a crazy looking drawing or, whatever something like that, you weren't allowed to use the word, things like that. So yeah, I mean, that's fine. You find other words, you find other ways of doing these things. It's not an insurmountable problem or anything, but it's just, you scratch your head and think, okay, what was that about?
Right. Yeah. I guess it's easy to say mad instead of crazy, right? You're across the waters. But yeah, that's interesting, right? We talked about Cruella de Vil's not allowed to smoke anymore. And that's been a thing for a while, basically since right after that first live action movie. But yeah, it's interesting. Now, you work with licensed properties a lot. Do you sort of enjoy working in those parameters or enjoy the challenge that comes with having to sort of hold up a banner, so to speak?
It depends on the property, I guess. If it's something that's sort of in sync with my own sensibilities, that's obviously more fun than something that I feel isn't. But I've been pretty lucky. Most of them have been. Yeah, I mean, the one that I guess was most sort of, one that I ticked off my wish list was Popeye. That was huge because I was a fan of Popeye since I was a kid, especially the ECC Gar strips from the 30s. So to be able to write Popeye was terrific, and the Muppets too. That sense of humor.
Yeah,
probably quite a big influence on my comics later on.
Nice. Yeah, no, it's funny. I watched a lot of Popeye as a kid, right? I came up in the 90s and we had Cartoon Network, and I didn't realize at the time that most of what they were showing on Cartoon Network were reruns of like far older shows. So I watched a lot of Popeye, the Flintstones, even like stuff like Thundercats. Like I was watching, and it's funny because a lot of that stuff is with Dynamite now, and I'm excited to sort of get to revisit those things as an adult. What is it about Popeye that you adored?
Well, for one thing, he looks like there is nothing about him that could have been made up by a committee. He's so totally unique and individual. He's not designed even slightly to appeal to readers. In fact, he's designed to actively repel readers, and they still love him. He's his rough edges are what make him interesting, I think. and he's for such an abrasive character, weirdly inclusive. He's really, I suppose, equally distant from everyone.
Right.
So he's got this sort of abrasive surface, but a really good heart. There's something really appealing about that.
For sure. I don't know what it was about Popeye that just kind of enchanted me as a kid. Now that I'm thinking about it, maybe I just liked how, like, after he ate the spinach, like, he just beat up anyone, like punching bulls. Like, it doesn't matter. And like, he would just do like the most outrageous feats. And then you got the other guy that likes to eat hamburgers, and like, how many ways can Bluto take olive oil captive? Like, but it was always fun. And it's just like, I don't know, when I think of cartoon, I think of Popeye. Like, it's just like the most cartoonish thing. Like, there's things that happen in Popeye that you just couldn't do in live action, or like wouldn't look good with like CGI. It's just good old fashioned cartoon.
Yeah. Moving lines.
Right.
Or not moving in the case of comic strips.
True. So, okay. So we've talked a lot about just the fun and joy in cartooning. What are some of the things that you're looking at and enjoying right now?
What am I looking at and enjoying? I've been working through a pile of Christmas books. I've got some graphic novels by Jason, published by Fantagraphics. Upside Dawn is the one I just read. I've got the new Daniel Clowes book, Monica, which I'm looking forward to. That's in the pile. And outside of comics, I've been reading some books. There's a series by C.K. McDonnell called The Stranger Times, which I've been enjoying. That's sort of humorous supernatural stuff.
Okay.
What else? There's a book came out recently by a cartoonist I really like, a British cartoonist called Mark Stafford, which is a collection of stuff he's done over the last 20, 30 years, called Salmonella Smorgasbord, which is really great, sort of horror but funny as well. He's a very, very talented cartoonist. Very well, he can draw really well, but he puts it in the service of this very funny, dark stuff. Off the top of my head, there's a few things.
Nice. And so you've been working in cartoons for a long time. Are there any sort of dream characters or dream comics you'd love to do but haven't gotten the opportunity to do them yet?
There's an old strip, Barney Google, that I really love. And I got a chance to do one Barney Google story in an issue of Popeye. And I would love to do more with that character. Nobody cares, it'll never happen. He's a character that nobody's heard of, so it's just me who wants that. But
right.
That would be one for the bucket list. Of things that people have heard of, I don't know. I've done most of the stuff I really love. I'd love to do Uncle Scrooge. I'd love to do an Uncle Scrooge story.
Yeah.
Because that was such a formative influence on me. Yeah.
Okay. Now, do you know where Uncle Scrooge is right now? I don't know if that's still with Fantagraphics or if Dynamite could do an Uncle Scrooge book.
I don't know who's doing the new stuff. I mean, obviously there's loads of European publishers who've been doing them for years. That's where Bob Rosa did most of his stuff. So I guess that's an option as well. I don't know who's doing new stuff in the English-speaking market. I don't know if anybody is. So that's, it's kind of a shame, really.
It is. That is to think about. Huh. I don't know. Let's start a petition.
Yeah.
Roger for Uncle Scrooge. Okay. So Justice Ducks is out January 24th, which is great because my birthday is the 22nd. So
hooray!
I get to buy 2 copies as a gift to myself. My favorite cover is for issue 1 is that JLI homage variant that you did. I really love that cover.
Thank you.
So even how is it wrapping up putting a cover on a book that you also wrote and drew? Like, what are you thinking about when it comes to, okay, how do I present this to the guy that's just walking into the shop? How do I get them to grab it?
It's not an exact science. My method is generally to do a whole lot of different sort of little thumbnail drawings and then send the best ones to whoever's the editor. In this case, that was Nate, and he'll say, "Go for that one." And sometimes I'll draw it, and then Disney will say, "No, we don't like that." So I have to go back and do another one. But yeah, so there's a lot of variables. Ideally, you want something that's just a catchy idea and visually striking, and something that doesn't look too much like the previous one either, because you want them to stand out from one another as well as from everything else in the stands.
Right.
So yeah, that's sort of my approach, just to try and you know, to keep it simple and striking, keep the composition simple, so that it doesn't, you know, you don't get lost. It doesn't get lost.
Right.
The important details don't get confused.
For sure. Okay. So yeah, so Justice Ducks is out January 24th. I'm excited about it, as you guys can tell. And you can grab that at dynamite.com/Disney, or of course you can pre-order at your LCS. It'll be a 5-issue series. So go ahead, grab issue 1 and let your shop owner know, hey, I want the whole enchilada. But outside of Justice Ducks, what other projects are you working on right now?
Right. Well, I've got a graphic novel coming out later this year from First Second Books about the Prohibition era. It's part of their History Comics line. That's written by Jason Viola and drawn by me. That's coming out in October. I'm working on some personal stuff. I've got a self-published comic I did for a while called Zoot that I want to get back to. And there was a serial running in that about William McGonagall, who, if you haven't heard of him, was a real character from the 19th century, who is widely regarded as the worst poet who ever lived. And I've been doing a story about an incident in his life when he visited London and tried to make his fortune, and sort of what happened there. So I've done a couple of chapters of that, and then it was on hiatus for a couple of years, and I'm trying to get back into that. I'm working on that at the moment. And I've got these projects with Nate Cosby that I was talking about. Hopefully one of those will be starting up soon. Okay. Just waiting for somebody to sign off on it.
Awesome. And so before we sign off, I'm going to ask, because I guess you've always had the goal of being a cartoonist, and now you're a cartoonist, which that's an amazing feat within itself. But when it's all said and done, right, if somebody's going to look back at the life and work of Roger Langridge, what do you want that life's work, like, what do you want the statement to be about it?
In a perfect world, I'd be best remembered for the stuff I came up with myself. I don't think that's going to happen. I think probably my tombstone will read "Wrote the Muppets and died." But you know, that's not bad either. If people enjoy it and it means something to them, that's worthwhile.
Okay. And so is there say like a central theme or like a thesis that you might have for your work that you try to represent every time you step up to a project?
Not really. I mean, I try to make it something I would want to read, which I suppose what everybody tries to do, but
right.
Yeah, I'm really conscious of being part of a lineage, you know, of the kind of cartooning I do, not being in fashion particularly, but in a tradition that goes back to the beginnings, you know, to old newspaper strips and that sort of thing. And I hope I'm carrying the torch for that kind of cartooning, because I regard that as kind of where it all came from. You know, the fundamental building blocks of my craft came from there, and I hope to continue that tradition.
Nice. No, that you strike me as someone who is very much sort of well studied, you know, and dedicated to a craft, even you know, even just in what you're reading and what you recommend, right? It's off the beaten path isn't the word per se, but it's really just like it's dedication is what comes through. So that's exciting. And so it makes me want to check out more of your work. Because, you know, like I said, I was mostly familiar with the Muppets. I've only been reading comics for like 5 years. So now I get to, through the power of the internet, go and find everything. And so I'm excited to now know of your work, and to be able to share it with others as I come across.
Fantastic.
Awesome. So, well, Justice Ducks is out once again, January 24th, next Wednesday. Go to your local comic shop and pre-order it. You can order it online at dynamite.com/Disney. I just want to say thank you to Nick and Amy for helping to set this conversation up. And of course, thank you to you, Roger, for making the time to speak with us.
Thanks, Brendan. It's been nice.
Man, I'm so grateful to Roger for just spending time with us, having that conversation. These are always a gift and a curse. It's a gift because I get to get more insight into how comics are made and what inspires some of my favorite creators. And it's a curse because I always leave with so many amazing reading recommendations. And then I got to figure out, how am I going to pay for all these reading recommendations? But I'm super excited. After we talked, I dove into the Muppets head first. Thankfully, the Muppets Omnibus is going relatively cheap on eBay. So that was really cool. But this unlocked so many core memories for me just from childhood. Popeye, the cartoon, newspaper strips, all of that. And I'm glad that Roger's able to get, some love and continue doing the thing that he loves to do so much, which is cartooning. But anyway, that's enough for me. Until next time, man, thank you guys so much for listening. Make sure you stay safe out there, stay awesome, and read something dope today. Peace.